Before we get started on this very intriguing interview on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict with Jason Olson, an Israeli expert and naval officer and diplomat, I want to give a shout out to Stephen Pinecker from Mormon Book Reviews. He's the one who set this interview up. If you want to take a look at what he has to offer there, he kind of talks about all things Mormon, so to speak. You can go to YouTube and find him under Mormon Book Reviews. Thank you, Stephen. I also want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Fathom the Good. Fathom the Good is the source for online courses for the American founding and an understanding, really, of what is going on in the world today. They now offer not just K-12 courses, but they offer adult courses. And these adult courses are great for you as an individual and as a parent. If you're wanting to speak with your kids about what is going on today, all of these changes, this crazy vocabulary and things that are happening out there and what they're receiving on their social media and their phones and in their education at school, and you want to understand and get clarity on being able to speak to them about these things, you first need a founding in a number of these principles. These courses will give you the ability to stand on firm ground in discussing the issues of today. Go to fathomthegood.com. That's fathomthegood.com. This will help you fight the woke ideologies that are encroaching on us as individuals and on our families. Here we go. All right, welcome to Cwic Show. My name is Greg Mattson, and I am your host. In this episode, we have Jason Olson, who received his PhD from Brandeis University in Near Eastern and Judaic Studies. We're talking about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, I am fascinated with your background in learning how we got to the point that we are now, what the relationship is with the United States and with Israel. A lot of this is bridged through Protestantism within the United States. Before we get to that bridge, though, I want to ask you, you put you along with a couple of other authors, put together an opinion piece for the Deseret News yesterday called Why Israel Deserves Our Support. Why does Israel deserve the support of the United States?
Oh, thank you, Greg, for that question. And just to preface, I'm not speaking for the United States of America or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Just speaking for myself. But I believe that that the state of Israel has a right to exist, and it has a right to defend itself. And so, in that piece, we were just trying to solve those two questions, right? So why does Israel have a right to exist? Well, we believe that from our religious point of view, we believe that the Jewish people continue to have a covenant relationship with God, and that covenant has continued on since the covenant made at Mount Sinai, and that the Jewish people have remained distinct as a people, as a nation, and that the land of Israel was promised by God to the Jewish people anciently, and that because of that belief that the Jewish people had, they constantly strove to establish themselves in the land of Israel in every single generation. We have a Christian myth. I would contend a Christian anti-Semitic myth that all the Jewish people were exiled from the land of Israel after the crucifixion of Jesus as a punishment. But history and archaeology, if we want to get into the secular point of view, indicates otherwise. There was always a Jewish minority in the land of Israel, even after the Roman destruction in the first and second centuries AD or CE, depending on how you measure the time. And even from 132 to 135 AD, there was a 3-year Jewish state led by Shimon Bar Kokhba, called the Bar Kokhba Revolt. So there's absolutely been a Jewish presence, even Jewish states after the crucifixion of Jesus. And so we wanted to highlight, even as members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, when Orson Hyde, considered to be an apostle of Jesus Christ, when he went to Jerusalem in 1841, even he found 7,000 Jews in Jerusalem out of a total population of only 20,000. So there have always been Jews living in the land of Israel. I and my colleagues, we see the Jewish population as indigenous. And we also recognize that Arabs are indigenous to the land of Israel as well, just because the nature of living in that land for millennia. Um, and so we see the Zionist movement as something that was both a religious obligation, or a religiously justified movement in gathering Jewish people back to their homeland, um, in order to reconstitute themselves as a distinct nation and government from Orson Hyde and a Latter-day Saint point of view, but also because of the increasing persecution and anti-Semitism that Jewish people in Europe and the Middle East experienced, that necessitated a secular need for a Jewish state, for Jewish people to continue to survive and protect themselves.
All right. So you're talking about land claims here, basically. I want to go back. What was it, October 7th, where we have the barbaric terrorist attacks that come from Hamas against the Israelites. I mean, horrific things that happen. Is what Israel is doing now, where they've now started their ground attack after all the bombing and everything else that's gone on in the Gaza Strip, is this simply a retaliation with the Palestinians in Gaza? Is this, how would you define this?
Well, I look at these things. I have a lot of military experience myself. I look at these things as the obligations that any state has to its citizens, right? The social contract, right? Um, as the citizens of a state give their assent to the state to make decisions to promote their security, their well-being, their economic well-being, um, the state has obligations. Every state has an obligation as a deliverable, to provide peace and stability and security for the citizens, so that the citizens can go about their daily lives, that they can work their economy and seek for prosperity, that they can raise their families, that they can express and advance their cultural products, or their cultural uh, uh, needs, and develop themselves, right, as human beings. And so yes, on October 7th, there was absolutely the state of Israel failed its citizens and failed to provide the peace and stability to all of its citizens, which includes 21%, which are Arab, right? So it is a Jewish state, and there's also citizens that are Christian, and citizens that are Baha'i and Druze and Armenian. Um, so Israel has this diverse population of citizens, and it failed to deliver peace and security to its people on October 7th. So now the state, as just like any state, has to do what is necessary to defend the citizens and to restore uh, a an environment of peace where they can live their lives. And that, I think, the end state is not retaliation or revenge. It's a very sober reestablishment of deterrence, to keep Hamas, to keep the people living in the Gaza Strip from disrupting normal life.
Now, that deterrence, this is something that gets conflated, I think, quite a bit. And I think that it is important to have a distinction here. But that deterrence is against Hamas, not the Palestinians. Is that right? And how would you
Yeah,
distinguish
of
those two
course.
groups?
Of course. I mean, it's very simple, right? On October 7th, these Hamas terrorists, they broke a boundary, a border, a wall separating the Gaza Strip and the state of Israel. And they entered into Israeli sovereign territory, and they murdered, slaughtered, tortured, raped, kidnapped, mutilated babies, women, elderly, innocent people, people at a music festival. And so they violated the sovereignty of the state and innocent civilians. Um, so so I see that for all intents and purposes, Gaza, the Gaza Strip, is a sovereign entity. People talk about the continuation of occupation. I mean, there were no Israeli soldiers in the Gaza Strip. There were no Israeli citizens inside the Gaza Strip. This was a terrorist invasion. Now, folks lament the blockade, but why is the blockade? The blockade is a legitimate military tool in time of war. And ever since Hamas came to power in the Gaza Strip as a nation state has been at war with the state of Israel, its neighbor. And the state of Israel has a responsibility to its citizens to to deliver peace and stability. So they've had to conduct a blockade to prevent weapons and also dual use, what's called dual use materials that can be used to create weapons. So how are, we're on November 2nd now. How is Hamas still firing rockets at Israeli civilian sites and trying to murder Israeli civilians? That tells you all you need to know about why a blockade has been necessary.
So again, the distinction here with Hamas and the Palestinians. Hamas, for those that don't know, it took power, and in 2006 they came into power with the Palestinians. When I say that, I mean they became let's just call it the legislative and the authoritative figures completely.
Yeah.
Brought in by the Palestinians vote, so to speak. We don't know exactly how legitimate, I suppose, that is, but there has not been a vote since then. Right? I mean,
No.
they don't even offer a vote. It is basically a tyranny in that respect.
Yes.
A dictatorship with Hamas over Palestine. But how supportive do you believe the Palestinians are of Hamas? I mean, you've got, for example, a son of a Hamas leader who is now going around doing media interviews talking about how horrible Hamas is, etc. He's definitely separating himself from what is really a terrorist group. I mean, they are ISIS. It is the same thing.
Yes.
Right? They are ISIS. But how the reason I say this, Jason, is because what you get here in the United States is, for example, the hashtag Free Palestine.
Yes.
Right. Hamas is removed from the equation. It's Free Palestine. It's Palestinian Solidarity. How much of that on our end is Hamas solidarity and keep Hamas in power instead of just Free Palestine?
Well, it's our folks sympathizing with Hamas's intent and goals. So Hamas's goals are extremely clear. They laid their goals out in their 1988 charter or covenant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I have it right here. I've read it many times, but my wife, told me I needed to review it. Right, the Hamas Covenant 1988.
Mm-hmm.
You can find it at Yale Law School. The whole document, and their intentions are extremely clear. They have swallowed Nazi propaganda that there is a Jewish conspiracy, that the Jewish people have set up their world domination in the land of Israel or Palestine, how they call it. and the Jewish people control the United Nations, and the Jewish people control the United States, and the Jewish people organized and orchestrated all the world wars. And so the Hamas covenant calls upon the global extermination of the Jewish people, starting with the Jews living in the Holy Land, the land of Israel, right? It's extremely clear. And so the liberate in their view, the liberation of the Holy Land is to establish an Islamic empire. So I just was talking to a scholarly friend and she really liked the phrase that I said. Hamas is about religious imperialism. So yes, it's got a small little Gaza Strip as its enclave, but what is it? It represents religious imperialism. It represents an Islamic empire enforcing only Islamic law, subjecting Christians, Jews, Baha'is. Um, and I mean, if there's Yazidis, right? We see like what ISIS did. If they're considered truly, if they're, it would distinguish between the people of the book. Well, it could, but I mean, when it comes to Jews, the Jews are so obstructive to Hamas's goals that the Hamas covenant calls for just the extermination of all Jews. So that's why I think we are seeing this inspiration of global anti-Semitism right now. Hamas is inspiring a global war on the Jews, and there's a Wall Street Journal op-ed from the editors of Wall Street Journal that is what is occurring. That this is not even about land anymore. It's about
It's not.
global. It's about global Islamic empire.
Yeah, and people don't understand. If you go back and you look at the history of Hamas and what they've stated, what the leaders have talked about, I mean, the leaders of Hamas don't even live, most of them, in Palestine and the Gaza Strip. They would never live in that place because it is,
right.
They've destroyed it. They keep it destroyed. The economy is horrific. And it doesn't just have to do with a blockade. It has to do with the leaders taking the money, including money given to them by the United States. And they're millionaires living, a number of them in Qatar and other places, et cetera, where they kind of run their operations from these other countries. But Hamas has stated over and over again that their goal is an imperialism, right? It is an Islamic imperialism. They want world domination. Again, they are ISIS. It is the same thing. So you have people here who are saying free Palestine. What they're really saying and supporting, if they understood the people in power that are pushing this, what they're really saying is we want Islamic domination worldwide. We are supporting Hamas, which wants an Islamic state, worldwide and globally, including here in the United States.
Yes, and they believe that a victory over the Holy Land, which the prime real estate, if they can establish religious empire over the Holy Land, that they believe that will give them the momentum and the inspiration to then press on to the rest of the world.
Yeah. You talk about how important it is to have to demilitarize, the borders here with the Gaza Strip. There's a couple things on that. Number one, as I see it, and I'm certainly no expert on this, but as I see it, Israel absolutely has to get rid of Hamas. That they have to get rid of any kind of functioning organization,
right?
As best as they can.
Over the state apparatus.
Yeah, they've got to get rid of that.
Yep.
I think that's crucial. I think that should be the goal. I fully support that. But obviously, you can't fully demilitarize. I think about the DMZ with Korea, right? I mean, you've got South Korea is also militarized on their end there, and so Israel's going to have to stay militarized on their end, right? Because they've got to protect that border. I mean, when they took the Gaza Strip from Egypt in the 6-day war, correct? Right, is when that happened.
Yes.
Okay, so they take that because they've got to protect themselves. Basically, that's what it is. And it's Egypt leading Syria and Jordan, which were basically coming after them in the 6-day war in 1967. But if they demilitarize, Well, they can't. I mean, if Israel demilitarizes on the border of Gaza Strip, they're dead. It's over.
The who? The people of
Israel.
Gaza?
Yeah,
No, no,
yeah.
no, 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 no. I'm only saying that the Gaza Strip should be demilitarized, not the state of Israel.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Only the Gaza Strip. Um, yeah. I mean, I think in our op-ed we, just the Gaza Strip should be demilitarized. Um, and this is also how the West Bank or Judea and Samaria is also demilitarized. Because going back to what I said before, the state of Israel as a modern nation state has a social contract with its citizens that it must deliver peace and stability to its citizens. And so it is intolerable. People forget about this. Not only was October 7th intolerable, the brutal murder, rape, torture, kidnapping of innocents, the rocket attacks are intolerable. You cannot continue to live under, even though there's Iron Dome and there's David Sling and Arrow, there's these missile defense. You cannot continue to live under the threat of rocket attacks on your sovereign territory. So it's just my personal position is that as Israel goes in, I think it should demilitarize the Gaza Strip so that it can end this. It can end any kind of attack on its sovereign territory, on its citizens. That's just the responsibility, the basic responsibility of a state. I served for a long time in South Korea, right? And you mentioned, right? Um, and what I noticed that was peculiar, just speaking for myself, is that Kim Jong Un, he fires rockets into the sea, numerous, dozens, right? Not as many as Hamas or Hezbollah, but he fires them into the sea because he knows what would happen if he fires rockets into sovereign Republic of Korea territory. And what have we done in South Korea? The United States and the Republic of Korea have established strong enough deterrence as an objective, quantifiable thing that you could measure. There is enough deterrence that is keeping Kim Jong-un from firing rockets into Korean sovereign territory and hitting South Korean citizens. Israel must establish that level of deterrence.
But why haven't they?
Because they were hoping over the last 16 years that they could tolerate. They didn't want to. Jewish people love life, right? Being raised as a Jewish person in my grandparents' home, l'chaim, to life. L'chaim, right, in Hebrew literally means to life. Jewish people are so committed to life. They will do anything to preserve life because life is sacred. And the idea of going in and demilitarizing the Gaza Strip or occupying the Gaza Strip would cost so many lives, soldiers' lives, and they didn't want to do it because they would rather spend money, a lot of money, on missile defense and tolerate the rocket attacks every couple years or every couple months. Get a spate of rocket attacks and intercept them, and then go about daily life. That was that I know that's the calculation that they made. But now after October 7th, right, and they see the capabilities of Hamas. I mean, at this point, that's why they're going in now to do a ground invasion to dismantle Hamas's control of the state, but also to stop the attacks, to stop it's intolerable for a modern nation state, right? I mean, we in Arizona, if if we started getting incessant rocket attacks from some terrorist group in Mexico, we all know what would happen across the border. You can't continue a normal, right? And so that's why I frame this as, a Jewish religious goal, a Christian Zionist religious goal, right? That the Jewish people, uh, we we have to stand with the concept of Jewish gathering, of Jewish immigration, but it's not just Amos chapter 9 talks about the Jewish people being planted in their land. So it's not just about going to the Western Wall and saying a prayer and then getting out of there and going back to the diaspora where you're safe. It's about creating a safe and secure Jewish home that Jewish people want to live in, that they want to immigrate to and want to stay in. That's kind of this, right? For those who believe in the mission of Orson Hyde and the biblical prophetic teachings, um, and that kind of mission. But also, from a secular point of view, the Jewish people have been. We know from just history and archaeology, there's only one indigenous homeland of the Jewish people, and that's the land of Israel. So this right to live in safety and security, I think, in both from a religious and secular point of view, necessitates the responsibility of the state in this situation.
How much is the hashtag Free Palestine or Palestinian Solidarity a mask for anti-Semitism?
Well, I mean, it depends, right? The folks are when we're talking about the Free Palestine from the river to the sea, that is a call for genocide, or politicide, right? The destruction of a state, but they're combined, right? And we're talking about the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea, the destruction of the state of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state would necessitate both, right? A genocide and politicide. Um, so, um, right, what they're really keying in on is their hatred of Israel's nature as a Jewish state and a democratic state. So we have to unpack that a little bit, right? So a Jewish state, what does that mean? Its character is Jewish. Its immigration is only really open to Jewish people, right? There's the 1950 law of return. It's been amended a little bit over the years, but basically the state of Israel was designed, and we can go back to Israel's Declaration of Independence even, to be open for Jewish people, the Jewish people's immigration, for people who practice Judaism. So it really does have a religious component to it. There even converts to Judaism are eligible to immigrate to Israel, and it's not racial. There are black Jews from Ethiopia, for example, who have been eligible to immigrate to Israel. Indian Jews, Chinese Jews, Jews from Arab lands, Yemen, Morocco, Tunisia, Iraq, right? So it's really a religious immigration, and the idea was to enable Jewish self-determination, to build up a majority Jewish population in a state so that the Jewish people can determine their own fate, and truly have freedom and liberty as Jewish people. So there's this attack on that and that nature of a Jewish state, that the Jewish people are undeserving of their own state. But then there's the problem of the democratic part of the state, right? And this is where, right, Israel has, because of its desire to remain democratic, it has restricted what's called the Palestinian right of return. And so because of the 1948 war, because there was a civil war between indigenous Jews and indigenous Arabs, before and during the 1948 war, the Israel Defense Forces at the time drove out the hostile Arab populations to the West Bank or to the Gaza Strip, where there's still refugee camps after 75 years, um, right? But there still has always been 20-21% or hovering around there, Arab Palestinians, citizens of Israel. So the Palestinian citizens of Israel are those who were not hostile. They remain in the land. But Israel Israel will does not want to allow the Palestinian refugees to have a right of return because they don't want to upset the demographics. They're comfortable keeping 79-80% Jewish population, 20% Arab population, so that when they have elections, they can have democratic elections and they can make sure that they're getting having a Jewish majority in their Knesset or their legislature, so that they continue to have self-determination. So what it all comes down to is, do the Jewish people have a right to self-determination, to a state of their own? When folks are saying free Palestine, they're saying no. A tiny Jewish state with 7 million Jewish citizens of the state of Israel that does not have a right to exist. I think that that's disgusting and anti-Semitic.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay. So there's I don't know if I'd call it a phenomenon, but across the U.S. on university campuses, you've got all these protests. You've got a number of people doing rallies, and everyone's probably heard of the Cornell University professor that was said that the October 7th barbaric attacks from Hamas against Israel were exhilarating, were the words used. And as if, and this is what I find with this type of thing, that any means, that the ends justify the means. And for them, the end is very odd, because it really is a destruction of the state of Israel. But it's, any means is acceptable, obviously, because I don't know how you get more brutal or horrific than what happened on October 7th. Are the campuses now anti-Semitic? Is this culture spreading throughout the United States primarily through the campuses? Because that's where we see this. These individuals are, as you said earlier in the interview, they're actually, these faculty members, administrators, they are actually adopting a Nazi-esque attitude toward the Jews. You've got the rally that happened in Sydney, Australia, where they're saying "gas the Jews, gas the Jews." I mean, it's so. How do people even want to be, as a word that's used a lot today, adjacent to such a vitriolic, horrific, anti-humanity type of a movement?
Yeah, Greg, it's really disappointing. It's going to require a lot more intervention from our state, from our government, the United States of America, that we're responsible to have safe campuses. I mean, as far as free of violence, the anti-Semitism is becoming violent. I mean, Jewish students are afraid for their lives. They're afraid they're going to get beaten, tortured, raped, murdered from their fellow classmates. Right? I mean, we're not in the third world, but the third world is on the campus, right? Mm-hmm. But even beyond that, I'm not surprised, right? When you look at German universities and German academia in the 1930s and 1940s, and even before, right? Germany had the most advanced research and development and academic culture in the world. If you wanted to get a great education in Europe, people from all over Europe would go to German universities. So why do we think that we're so much better than the Germans? Why do we think that we are not susceptible to the same kind of anti-Semitism that the Germans were? I mean, they were an extraordinarily advanced civilization. And we like to think that we are as well. So it's not like anti-Semitism just comes from crude, backwards peoples. Anti-Semitism comes from very advanced, quote unquote, civilized peoples as well. So I'm not surprised that the universities are being dominated by anti-Semitism, and it is not just targeted against Israeli Jews; it's targeted against American Jews. It's a global war, and Hamas, with what they've done, right? It's exhilarating for anti-Semites because they're exhilarated by killing Jews or marginalizing Jews or defeating Jews. Um, and that's it's just what's happening. Um,
Yeah, it's just so ironic because you have from the hard left, you have the accusations oftentimes of anybody on the right or anywhere calling them Nazis, or even for individuals calling them a Hitler, and here they are on the hard left now, moving pushing a movement that is as Hitler-esque as you can be.
yeah,
It's it defies any intelligence whatsoever in their statements and in their ideology. That's where the anti-Semitism. It's not that it doesn't exist on the right; it does, but
yeah,
the hardcore. Look what's happening on the campuses. This is not on the right, right? This is the hard left that is really the pusher and advocate of anti-Semitism today.
yeah. I think you're right about that. But it is interesting that in universities in Nazi Germany, in universities in the United States of America, that the hotbed for anti-Semitism is in the universities.
In the universities,
You know,
yeah.
right? We like to think that the universities are these places where we're trying to instill morality, we're trying to instill humanity, we're trying to instill conscience in leadership into our youth. But instead, universities can be places of propaganda and atrocious politics, um, a hatred. I mean,
Yeah,
Jewish
no.
students are afraid. I mean, Jewish campus centers, which I've been to in many campuses, they're on lockdown, and Jewish students cannot go there because of credible death threats from fellow classmates. I mean, this is intolerable itself. It's a failure in the United States of America. And that's why I'm calling on all universities, including universities in Utah, in universities where there's Latter-day Saints. You have to make your university campus safe for Jewish students. If you can't, you failed. I mean, and even from a Latter-day Saint point of view, America is supposed to be a promised land for all the tribes of Israel. And if you can't make it safe for Jews so that Jews feel compelled to go to Israel, that's what I'm hearing from a lot of Jewish leaders is many Jewish college-age students are thinking, maybe I just need to go to college in Israel because college campuses here in the United States are not safe for me at all, both physically, my physical safety, and my intellectual safety. So that's such an abject failure, right? If you're going to, if we have this concept of the gathering of Israel, but we can't provide for the safety of Jewish people in the United States, just that is a failure. Let alone,
Again, that's another irony where the birthplace of safe spaces is the universities for people that are triggered from different things, and here they're creating a hostile environment for a whole people.
Yep.
So I want to jump now to something else, and this is really fascinating to me because we're talking about what's going on here with the U.S., the responses to Israel, and the relationship that we have with Israel. You did, I believe, this your doctorate dissertation was done on mainline Protestantism or Protestantism and the relationship to Israel. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so you've
Dissertation turned
also
to book.
authored America's Road to Jerusalem: The Impact of the Six-Day War on Protestant Politics. This is fascinating to me. So let's set the stage here a little bit. You go back to 1967 and the Six-Day War. You've got Egypt, Syria, Jordan coming after what looks like an imminent strike to perhaps destroy the state of Israel. Israel goes out. I believe it was some pilots that came up with the idea of going out and saying, "Hey, we can destroy the airstrips of these air forces," and they do. They go out and they bomb these airstrips. It basically cripples the military operations of the countries, especially Egypt, and they win this war in 6 days.
Yep.
And there's a reaction in the United States to what's happening here, right? Israel's been around now for approximately 20 years as a state, a little
Yep.
over 20 years, I think. And there's this reaction in the United States from the majority of the religious leadership, which is Protestant, right, in the
Yeah.
United States. Can you go over what happens here, how this defines the Protestant religions with this 1967 war? And we're going to talk a little bit about where we are today, coming all the way up to the Abraham Accords, for example,
Yeah.
based on this DNA of the reaction to the 6 Day War.
Yeah, it is fascinating, Greg. Yeah, my advisor, his name is Jonathan Sarna. He's the the greatest living historian of American Judaism. He really encouraged me because he said we really need to unpack what happened uh, as a result of the 6 Day War to American Christianity, right? So it's this theory, right, that historical events can impact theology.
Mm.
Right, because when you're talking about prophecy or biblical teachings, right, that you can't just detach yourself from what's happening in real life in history. So that was the kind of the thesis, is like, well, let's see the 6 Day War of all events in the history of the modern Holy Land. This history had so many biblical implications, because as a result of the war, right, you get Israel gains East Jerusalem, which includes what we call the scholars, the Holy Basin. And the Holy Basin is the old city of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount complex, and also the Mount of Olives cemeteries. We call it the Holy Basin because it's just so thick with holy sites for Judaism in particular, but also for Christianity and Islam. I mean, so all three religions, this holy basin it's just thick with meaning and ancient meaning. It's referred to in the Bible over and over again. Mount Zion, right? That King David sets up the Ark of the Covenant, and Solomon builds the temple, and literally, right, God appears there. So it's very divinely concentrated. But then you also get the capture of previously held Jordanian lands, called, from a Jewish perspective, their biblical name is Judea and Samaria. I mean, it's really the heartland of the Jewish people. For example, Hebron, or Hebron, Hebrew, um, Hebron, which is south of Jerusalem. That is where King David initially established his capital. But even more importantly, it's where what's called the Cave of Machpelah, or the Tomb of the Patriarchs, where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their spouses were buried. I mean, so the forefathers and foremothers of the Jewish people are buried there, right? So there's an extraordinary attachment. For Latter-day Saints, uh, Hebron is equivalent to, I would say, the sacred grove, right? So it's this a sacred. If you were to deny Latter-day Saints, say you can't visit the sacred grove anymore, right? The community of Christ restricts you. You say, well, we believe the first vision happened here too. You know, you'd want to figure out a way for some kind of religious freedom or religious pluralism to go. But I mean, it's even more sacred. I mean, so Hebron is the second most holiest site in Judaism, period. So in the 6 Day War, I mean, let's just keep it simple. The state of Israel, gets access to its two most holy sites, because the Jordanians, restricted it. They wouldn't let them worship there. I
Mhm.
mean, just from just from an angle of religious freedom only. So so this is exhilarating for Judaism, is all I'm saying. That they can have that. But when we're looking at Christianity, okay, so um, now some literally biblical events have happened, in my view. And what I looked at was from basically the far right, the kind of the moderate right, the centrists, the moderate left, and then the far left. And so, starting from the far right, we had the forerunner of Jerry Falwell. Jerry Falwell is very famous, and I also examined Jerry Falwell's documents and archives. But his forerunner was named Carl McIntyre. And Carl McIntyre, his response to the Six-Day War and his movement, the American Christian Council of Christian Churches, um, they adopted themselves as fundamentalists, right? He was immediate during and after the Six-Day War that this was a fulfillment of biblical prophecy. Israel has the Temple Mount again. It has these biblical lands, and he offered his total support to the results of the Six-Day War. Even the Israeli Foreign Ministry and Israeli Ministry of Religious Affairs picked up on this. Say, look at this guy, Carl McIntyre. He is giving us full support. But Carl McIntyre was interesting because he was also kind of anti-Semitic in the
Mm.
United States. He had a radio show where he accused the Anti-Defamation League of, kind of, having very left-wing sympathies. And so he was in this, he loved what the state of Israel is doing, but he was actually like combating the establishment American Jewish community at the same time. So it's kind of interesting. So that, I looked at records of the American Jewish Committee, American Anti-Defamation League, and they were kind of like, well, we don't really want to build a partnership with this guy because he's, the American Jewish community has always kind of stood for kind of religious freedom, religious pluralism, and also kind of um, more liberal immigration policies because, um, American Jews only made it to America based on more liberal immigration policies. So they've kind of extended that right to non-whites. And so Carl McIntyre, right, was in that camp. But then you have the kind of the heartland, Billy Graham. So I examined Billy Graham, and I went through his records. He developed this great relationship with a Rabbi, Mark Tannenbaum, that I wrote a lot about. But Mark Tannenbaum was a student of Abraham Joshua Heschel, who's much more famous. So Abraham Joshua Heschel is kind of like one of my rabbis.
Mhm.
Um, but Billy Graham really comes into a real relationship with both Israeli and American Jewish leaders at this time. And he really cements this kind of evangelical Jewish alliance. Because Billy Graham is a moderate evangelical, moderately right wing. Um, he is full throated in his support of Israel. Uh, he sees it as fulfillment of the biblical prophecies in the Six-Day War, but he's also kind of tempering it. He wants to have a good relationship with American Jews, and so he's also he warns through his interfaith dialogue. He kind of pulls back a little bit, say, I'm not going to target Jewish people for conversion in the United States, because American Jews can also be an object or a target of missionary work too, right? So
Mhm.
Billy Graham he becomes very sensitive and very politically savvy, and so he gets the support of a lot of Jewish people and Israeli leaders, American Jewish leaders, and they really see him as this pro-Jewish figure that they're just so thrilled that um, of his perspective and his big heart and his sensitivity to all these issues. And he still continues his crusades, his missionary work. But this is where I found these documents in the archives where Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum of the American Jewish Committee says, Billy Graham is the greatest friend of the Jewish people that they may have ever had. And so he's trying to win over, say, hey, my fellow Jews, we need to look at Billy Graham, and these people are really pro-Jewish. We shouldn't be so afraid of them. But then you have what I call the Christian realists, which are really like the centrists. There's this very famous, at the time, a lot of people have forgotten about him now, but Reinhold Niebuhr. And I would say that I kind of fall more into the Reinhold Niebuhr world a little bit. I really, really like Reinhold Niebuhr. And he's fascinating. He is considered to be the greatest theologian, Christian theologian of the 20th century. A lot of scholars would say, it's Jonathan Edwards and Reinhold Niebuhr. Because Billy Graham is a great leader, a great preacher, but he's not considered like this great theologian as far as scholar academic. But Reinhold Niebuhr, right? He has this journal called Christianity in Crisis, and he's the founder of Christian realism. And he's very much pro-Zionist, pro-Jewish, but Jews on their own terms, right? So his Zionism is not informed by apocalypse or the end times. And so he is the one. He's actually got like a very close friendship with Abraham Joshua Heschel. They're best friends. They both are there in New York City. Reinhold Niebuhr's at the Union Theological Seminary. Heschel's at the Jewish Theological Seminary. They're kind of connected. So, and that's something that I'd like to do more research on is the Niebuhr-Heschel kind of dialogue. And I think we can learn a lot from that. That's, maybe a future research project. But Niebuhr, he kind of sees Judaism on its own terms. He very early on says, I don't want to do missionary work to Jews. I believe Judaism has its own authentic covenantal integrity with God. And so he's kind of the first major theologian in America to say that, Christian theologian. He has a Lutheran background, but not just that. So he was a pacifist social gospeler in between World War I and World War II. But this was the vogue. But when the Nazis come to power in 1933, Niebuhr abandons his pacifism because he has such a deep, sincere love for the Jewish people. And that's what he's known for. And he's an Americanist. And so he got sucked up into the social gospel. Walter Rauschenbusch, I don't know how, if you know the history of the social gospel, but Niebuhr breaks, and he develops a new journal, Christianity in Crisis, and he says, I'm a Christian realist. And so he develops this kind of, in those times, he's challenging Nazism. He's constantly writing against Nazism. He's well aware of the Holocaust. He develops the American Christian Palestine Committee. I mean, it's a pro-Israel, pro-Zionist committee.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's really before World War II, during World War II, and up until the creation of the State of Israel, up until the 1967 war, Reinhold Niebuhr is the leading Christian Zionist in America. So my argument was that after the Six-Day War, it becomes Billy Graham because of the numbers and right. But Reinhold Niebuhr, I mean, we have all the records. I mean, he is the one leading the charge. We need a Jewish state. It's just he doesn't have all the numbers, and he's kind of more in the mainline Protestant world. I can say more about him, but then we have the real social gospelers. We got Martin Marty, Kyle Hazelden, these people that basically the people that edit the Christian Century, still a pretty famous journal. And they're really all about the social gospel and kind of pacifism. And so not all of them, right? They still have an appreciation for Judaism, but these are the folks that I detected they kind of align themselves with the United Nations, right? Whereas Reinhold Niebuhr is actually really an Americanist. He becomes like a Cold Warrior as well, and he sees the dangers of communism, and he's really all about American sovereignty and kind of a strong American foreign policy. But the social gospelers and the pacifists, they're kind of in this Christian century world. They're very critical of Israel during and after the 6-Day War, because they just have such a problem with Jews defending themselves. They love Jews as victims, and they're so sad about the Holocaust. But then when Jews pick up and the Jews say, we're not going to be victims, we're going to defend ourselves, we're going to have our own self-determination, we're going to be masters of our own destiny.
That's interesting.
They're so uncomfortable with that. And so they kind of get sucked up. Well, what's the United Nations saying? And you see them like politically aligning with, some of these, and then you have Zionism as racism in the 1975. And you kind of see them aligning their morality with what's going on there. Then you have the liberation theologians on the hard far left. And these are folks that are actually working with Reinhold Niebuhr at the Union Theological Seminary.
Mm-hmm.
So I have John Coleman Bennett. Nobody's really heard of him anymore, but and then you have Rosemary Radford Ruther. She's pretty famous still, but Rosemary Radford Ruther is so fascinating because I developed this whole new paradigm of supersessionism as a result of my research. And so Rosemary Radford Ruther, she would go around and she would try to win some Jewish friends, because she would say, like, hey, I believe Judaism is authentic. It's a genuine covenant with God, and Jews don't need to convert to Christianity to have a saving relationship with God. And so Jews are like, oh, this Rosemary Radford Ruther, we can dialogue with her. But she was a hard anti-Zionist.
Mm-hmm.
So I teased this out, and I said, well, she may not be a religious supersessionist, but she's a national supersessionist. And I examined her theology. She believes that the Jewish people have no right whatsoever to a state of their own, to a sovereign existence in their homeland. So basically that while, Judaism as an act of worship is okay, in her theology, the Jewish people exercising their right to a collective existence as a people, well, God has canceled that part of the covenant. So it's you see how it's so complicated, but this is how she was this pro-Judaism but anti-Zionist, and so we see all these positions carry on into today across Christendom.
And so does the 1967 war, the 6-Day War, is that what sets them into concrete, more or less, into each of these positions you just explained?
Yes. So
what crystallizes these
crystallizes it. Yes. So because the gains are made, right? You got the Jerusalem issue, you've got the Judea and Samaria and the West Bank issue, you've got Israel defending itself, and the pacifism and the militarism issue. So all these positions become crystallized. Now, a lot of these people pass away, but their positions continue on into this day. And I think in every church, I mean, there's denominations that are more pro-Zionist or anti-Zionist, but I try to just lay out the structure in the book. And we can even find it in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. That's what I think has kind of made me a little dangerous, because I know where these theological positions, and we got religious supersessionism and national supersessionism, and we've got pacifism, and we've got neutrality, and we've got kind of Americanism or cosmopolitanism, right? We've got these different frameworks by which most Christians just view the world, right? And then it affects their theology, but also their Weltanschauung, their worldview.
So let me move from there. Then I want to go over to the Abraham Accords here. And,
Yeah.
the timing of this Hamas attack is not coincidental, right? You've got Saudi Arabia, who looks like they're, many think, imminently going to be signing
Yeah.
onto the peace accords here shortly. They then put this on pause because of the Hamas attacks. And, the Hamas attacks seem to have done partly, at least, what they tried to accomplish, right? They wanted to put that on hold. You get Saudi Arabia all of a sudden onto the signing of this, the really historic. This would be unbelievably historic.
Yeah.
You've all of a sudden got this power, this conflict between the Arab Muslim states and Israel, coming just a little bit closer together here at this point. I mean, Saudi Arabia is one of the major players in this. They're opposite in many ways to Iran.
Yep.
You've got the Sunnis, for example, in Egypt. You've got the
Shiite.
The Shiites. Thank you.
Yeah.
In the Shia in Iran, and so you've got a power play between those two. Iran and Saudi Arabia, two of the major players in the Muslim world, and so the Abraham Accords are something that are really a great effort by the United States to try and bring everything together and to create peace, right? Hamas doesn't want peace.
No.
They're pushing against this. There's no question they don't want peace. Where are we at with the Abraham Accords now at this point? Is there a chance for this to continue to move forward? And what is the role that they would play in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict?
Yeah, that is an extremely important question, Greg. The Abraham Accords, I think, are still in play. They're still holding. This whole war is a test of the Abraham Accords and what we call Arab-Israeli normalization and Arab-Israeli regional integration, right? I mean, that's the kind of the social scientific term of what the Abraham Accords is. And I think it's holding. United Arab Emirates and Bahrain have said, we're going to keep our diplomatic relations with Israel, and we're going to they want to continue the prosperity, the trade, the people to people ties, the peace between the countries. It's in their interest, right? They're just trying to define their national interests. It's not cost effective to wage war, continue to wage endless wars on the Jewish people, right? And they're not going anywhere, right? That's kind of the recognition of with the Abraham Accords is, oh well, we tried to throw the Jews into the sea again and again and again, and we can't because this is where they belong. You have the anti-Semitic ones that say, go back to Poland, which is, I mean, it's just so anti-Semitic to tell the Jews to go back to Poland. But in any case, one of the beauties of the Abraham Accords, when we're talking about kind of transcendental history, is the Abraham Accords actually represents a return to the golden age of relations in the Middle East between Muslims and Jews. It's an acknowledgement that Jews have always lived in the Middle East. I mean, they've always lived in the land of Israel, but they've also always lived in the Middle East, including the Persian Gulf. There's always been, Yemeni Jewish communities in the Persian Gulf. There's always been Jews in Morocco and Tunisia and the North African countries. And there's a memory of how Jews were beneficial to Muslim communities in the past. And there's this dynamic that's changing that's saying, you know what? Even in the Islamic world, we had Jewish communities that were autonomous and they governed themselves, and we were good neighbors with each other. And so what? The Jews have reconstituted themselves as a more condensed and more massive macro community in the land of Israel. and it's called the State of Israel. But it's nothing scary. It's just a big Jewish community, and so what if the Jews are more concentrated? But there's this recognition, absolutely, in the United Arab Emirates, for example, where they're like, we've always had Jewish communities in this region, so let's have a relationship with this big Jewish community. It's not really that unprecedented. And they are actively fighting against anti-Semitism. Even Saudi Arabia, to prepare itself for this normalization, has reformed all of their textbooks and removed anti-Semitic ideology from the children's textbooks because they want to deliver normalization and peaceful relations with the Jewish people in the future. And that's what's happening. It's transforming. It's really just combating anti-Semitism is all it is. The State of Israel is not a big deal. There's always been Jewish communities in the Middle East. So but even when you look at the Middle Eastern Jewish communities, right? There's, for example, in Iraq, there was what's called the Farhud, where Iraqi fascists inspired by Nazi ideology in 1941, right? 1941, they massacred their own Jews in Iraq who had been living there for millennia, right? I mean, the Babylonian Talmud was written in, modern day Iraqi geography. So
a lot of people don't realize when the Jews went into exile in 587 BC and went to Babylon, there was only a small portion of them that returned to Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Right. The vast majority remained in Babylon, which is today's Iraq. And then
that's right.
And went out into the Babylonian world and eventually the Persian world after they conquered Babylon and ended up in the diaspora in the Middle East. So it's the vast majority of Jews actually were throughout the Middle East. Not in Jerusalem. Now, there were a number of them in Jerusalem. They've always been there.
Yep.
But the Babylonian Jews were the largest group of Jews for millennia.
Yeah. So the ancient community that modern Iraqi Nazism, in the 20th century, forced them out. And forced them out. Where can they go? They went to Israel. Most of them. Also, the United States, they're just to be a little critical of the United States. If you think, well, why couldn't the Jews just come to America? Well, there was restrictive legislation, both for Jews in particular and for just immigrants from Middle Eastern countries, right? Due to basically white supremacy. So for Middle Eastern Jews, the State of Israel has been the only option most of the time, and that's why a majority of Israeli Jews are from Middle Eastern Jewish ancestries. Morocco, Iraq, Persia, Yemen, etc. We call them Mizrahi Jews or Jews, Jews from the East. Israel is really a Mizrahi nation. That's why most American Jews are Ashkenazi. My own ancestors, right, came from Ukraine, Poland, Russia, not the Middle East. So how did we get into America? Well, because what's their country of origin? Well, their country of origin was, Ukraine, Poland, Russia. Now, if my ancestors were from Yemen and they're trying to get into Ellis Island, America has not been as friendly to immigration from Middle Eastern, anybody from the Middle East, whether it's Jewish, Christian, Muslim, it doesn't matter. That's just how America, right? How America has sometimes viewed itself. And that's a whole separate debate, but people have got to realize the Jewish people are indigenous to the Middle East. They're indigenous to the land of Israel. This whole settler colonialism thing is just ridiculous and disgusting. In many ways, I'm an American Jew living in Hawaii, right? The natives here are Hawaiians, and my own United States Marines came in and destroyed the Hawaiian kingdom and set a process of annexing these islands to the United States of America. So how dare I ever criticize Israeli Jews for living in the one and only indigenous Jewish homeland? To call Israeli Jews settler colonists is ridiculous. There are American Jews that have the audacity, the chutzpah, to say that the Israeli Jews are the settler colonists. All the while, American Jews are sitting here on land that, the United States of America has achieved sovereignty over from the indigenous inhabitants. But, as Latter-day Saints, that is the story of the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon actually says it was in the divine providence to have settler colonialism here in the United States. That doesn't mean that we don't have a great respect for the native inhabitants, right? We're the one of the few churches that sees the native inhabitants as actually a remnant of the house of Israel. So that's a beautiful thing about the Book of Mormon. But to deny that to the Jewish people and to say that the Jews are just settler colonists from Poland or something, it is pure anti-Semitism. I call it out now. I can challenge you. I can challenge anybody that thinks that. I have a PhD in it. I can work you to the bone. I mean, anyway, I'm from Arizona, right? I can dig in the earth in Arizona. I can't find a lot of Jewish stuff, but I can dig in the earth in Israel. I can find all kinds of Jewish stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
that's a good point. All right. I want to end with this. We talked about the Abraham Accords. There are a couple of Latter-day Saints that have been very involved with this, and involved with the relationship with Israel. One of them is Robert C. O'Brien, who works with Mike Pompeo. Can you tell us a little bit about Robert C. O'Brien?
Yeah. I mean, he is right. He's a Latter-day Saint, but I think doctrinally, he's embraced like all these doctrines that we have so much in common with Christian Zionists, with the Protestant dispensationalists, right? We have this form of Robert C. O'Brien, he made a video with Dennis Prager, who's a Orthodox Jew, very, very famous, and makes this, a very sincere case that we've been talking about, that the Jewish people have a religious right, a moral right, a historical right, a natural right to have a nation state in their indigenous homeland. And, Robert C. O'Brien was, as the national security advisor, he was directing the policy that led to the Abraham Accords, right? And he was, and that's what I guess that's my point is, how do you make the Abraham Accords work? You have to combat anti-Semitism, right? Anti-Semitism is the macro cause of the warfare. It's not about land. Jews have always lived in the Middle East. They are a Middle Eastern people. The issue is the desire to destroy and exterminate Jews. So how do you deal with that? You say, hey, maybe we should just let Jews live, and we should have peace with them, and we should trade with them. And the Emiratis have made billions and billions of dollars off of the Israelis. It's a win-win.
No, I was going to say also there's a former ambassador who's a Latter-day Saint to the UAE, correct? What was his name again?
John Rakolta. And he was
instrumental, I believe, in having the UAE involved in the Abraham Accords.
Absolutely, yeah. I've interviewed John Rakolta and know him and appreciate him and like him and love him. I mean he was a Latter-day Saint at that time of need, and and he was in Abu Dhabi. And he won over the hearts and minds of the Emiratis, like a great, Latter-day Saint missionary almost.
Mm-hmm.
And he bought Emirati artwork, and he just loved their culture so much. But John Rakolta also loves the Jewish people too. This is a thing, you can love both. You can be pro-Arab and pro-Jewish. What an amazing concept. I mean, John Rakolta is the living example. I mean, literally spending, 3-4 years of his life in the Emirates. And John Rakolta was instrumental in getting a Latter-day Saint temple in Dubai. And I think that all these things are connected. If you love the Jews, you'll probably also love some other children of Abraham called the Latter-day Saints. And if you love the Latter-day Saints, you probably also love the Jews. And if you want the children of Abraham to come together in peace, then you make it happen. And that's what John Rakolta did. And so it's not a surprise that as the Emiratis have acknowledged the legitimacy of Judaism and the Jewish people, they're also acknowledging the legitimacy of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's no coincidence that the Arab country that initiated the Abraham Accords is also the Arab country that is initiating a Latter-day Saint temple.
Interesting. Yeah, that's fabulous. Jason, this is wonderful stuff. Really appreciate what you've brought here to this discussion. We're going to want to have you on again, if possible, and talk a little bit more about this, as well as your background, which is very interesting, a Jewish background and conversion to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Thanks for your insights, and let's have you on the show again.
Thank you, Greg. This is wonderful.